All right, it says that we are live. Hopefully. Um. All right. Well, I've never done this as something just by myself. Hopefully, you guys can hear me just fine. Um. I will. Just gotta get everything set up here and sent out. Trying to get everything organized and send. All right. So everybody should have access to this thing. Yeah, I've actually had a lot of new subscribers to this channel, History Today. It's I'm actually trying to figure out where everybody's coming from because there was just a huge spike all of a sudden. I don't know where it came from. And also, Ed, I never ever take away this. Never. All right, so I promised that I would do some Patreon questions first, and then I would answer your guys' questions. So, the first question comes from the Phoenician, uh, written in Greek, but luckily I am fluent in Google Translate. Um, but he asks, what was the main deciding factor for you to study history professionally? It's not exactly the highest grossing profession these days. Yeah. um, I've also been curious about the motivations behind some of the philosophical background for your pursuit, like cynicism and pragmatism. Um, it sounded like you've had more than a passing interest in such subjects outside the direct purview of historical studies. And yeah, you're right. I definitely have more than a passing interest in philosophy. Um, I've actually got a bookcase tour that I finally filmed about a week ago and put together really quickly because there's going to be a bit of a content drought in a month. Um, and so you'll see that there's a lot of philosophical books on the shelf. Um, everything from Plato to Derrida. But the I have definitely done some episodes on cynicism and pragmatism and that kind of stuff, and um, part of the reason why I'm so interested in that stuff is because I was a philosophy minor in undergrad. I've never really used it for anything besides just kind of implied. I actually use a lot of Nietzsche in my stuff. Um, but hold on, what is up with the comments talking about pedophilia? What happened there? Oh, it's the mustache, probably the mustache. Okay, I was concerned there. What the heck was going on? Let's stop the pedo stuff, guys. That's really kind of disturbing. So back to the Phoenicians question. He asked, like, why is the main reason that I study history professionally? And that is, well, I'm a son of a historian, first of all. So, and my mother's a sociologist. So, kind of those two things combined. But then there's also just the fact that growing up, I actually started off as a architecture major and did not do well there. And so the is did Keemstar make a video about me, or is this just or is this just trolls? This is just trolls, right? Okay. Um. So the background on me being a historian is that parentage, of course, but I actually tried to avoid that at first. I didn't want to be a historian to begin with, and um, my friends just kept on complaining about me not really um, not relenting on the history front. That I was always telling them stories, and they'd complain about that. And to me, I was like, they're complaining about me talking and lecturing about this. I can make a career out of that. um, so yeah, that I have a love for history, as you can probably tell. But there's all of that background as well. There's also it's actually not as bad of pay as you would think. Obviously, professors never get paid very well for the amount of what they do. Because as a professor, while you might only be teaching a little bit, you are expected to work basically all the time. It is always going. Um, so there's an entire outside part of the profession that is not just being a professor, though. For instance, my father is not a professor, but he is a historian. Um, but the hey, Hector. Um, so the profession has this entire public history outside. I did a little bit of an episode on that when I went to the public history conference, but suffice it to say, there are more things out there to do as a historian than just being a professor. You can be a museologist, you can be a corporate historian, you can be just one for pop history and trying to sell your books. There's a lot of stuff to do outside of just being a professor. Um, uh, so yeah, it's not as bad of pay as you would think. It's still bad. Don't get me wrong, but it's not completely being in the poorhouse. So that was the Phoenicians question answered. The next one from Patreon is uh, I hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly. I don't know if this is Spanish or not. Janos Halix or Janos Jalix. Sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. Um, so he asks, what is your favorite historical movie of all time? And that has to be Patton. I absolutely adore the movie Patton. If you go back to the Based on a True Story playlist and look at, I think it's the second video in that playlist, the second video I ever did on Based on the True Stories, which are just like, these are the good ones. And Patton is literally the first movie that I talk about. I adore that movie, so much so that I am setting up a huge review of it on I'm planning on it being sometime around my birthday on August 31st. But this thing's going to be absolutely huge, and there's going to be quite a revealing end because I do have a bit of bias on that one. But you'll have to wait and see where that comes from. But, other ones that I really like are just, I'm a big fan of Westerns, especially if they're fictional. For instance, you'll see in the review that I'll be doing for Hostiles that I'm pretty forgiving of it. Um, and but then again, I can also be pretty angry when it comes to westerns. If you go back to The Revenant, I kind of despise that movie. Um, it's a western though, and like, but then again, in that review, I actually reviewed the previous movie about that subject, which was Hugh Glass, and yeah, I'm much more forgiving of that one. It's just this new one, it has no sense of the subject matter. The Yeah, I'm being asked by a friend if you guys got to. I'm gonna freaking make him a moderator on this because, good lord, guys, you guys are going a little too hard on the whole. Yes, I don't care if it's a pedo stash. I like it. um. So the those are the two questions from um Patreon. Um. So let's answer some of your guys' questions. Um. Cheers, by the way. Let's see here. If I Justin Roy asks if I may call you. Oh, Cypher. Yeah, call me Cypher. Um, Here's a riddle for you. Woodrow Wilson made my people citizens to fight in the First World War. What nationality am I? Puerto Rican. um, he Puerto Ricans were essentially um, uh, colonial subjects prior to World War One, and then Wilson did in fact make them full blown American citizens, except for they still don't have the right to vote for president. Um, and there's also kind of yeah, there's a lot of debate in your country over whether or not statehood is a good thing. Um, I think I land on the statehood side, but not my state or territory. Um, so another question. Let's see here. Mr. Hagen. Oh, I'm going to screw that up. Hageneno Edward asked me, what is my favorite historian or historical figure? Period. Historical period. Um, so it depends on region in terms of what my favorite historical period is. I study the American West, so obviously post 1848. But like in California history, I really like the bloody 50s, bloody 1850s. Um, that's what I did my senior thesis on. I mean, not senior thesis, my master's thesis on. Um, and you probably have noticed that a lot of the California history series is been having a hard time getting out of the 1850s because that's what I know. um, but then come over to Las Vegas, and my most interested period is like the 1900s to 1930s. Um, that period right before the Hoover Dam really pushed everything into overdrive. But then come over here to New Mexico, where I am now, and you will find that I'm more interested in the postbellum period, that time between 1865 and 1912, when New Mexico got statehood. Um, I'm kind of working towards a dissertation on that. I'm about a year away from doing the dissertation portion of stuff, but those are the periods I'm mostly interested in. Is just where's the violence? That's what I always center on, is where's the violence? That episode that I just did this week, most of my study has been that I've ever looked at the Russians is pre-World War One. I'm pre-World War Two, sorry. Especially right at World War One, the Russian intervention. But I've also done a lot of stuff on the purges, and that I've looked at it quite a bit. Post World War II, it's not as interesting, not as much violence, and that's what I really like, like studying violence. It's kind of sick, isn't it? He also asked, what is my favorite historian? And that depends on the subject. Overall, I am a huge fan of the Durants, Will and Ariel Durant. Just world history from Will and Ariel Durant, amazing. But it also, like, I study American violence, so I'm a big fan of Richard Maxwell Brown, Ned Blackhawk, Richard Slotkin. Yeah, those guys all, I use them a lot. In terms of the more philosophical historians, the ones that kind of form a field and an ideology, Michel Foucault, definitely. Michel Foucault, is his whole idea of governmentality really informs a lot of my own work. So I thought I had super chat enabled, but I'm not seeing it here. I hope I haven't missed any super chats. Okay, good. Anyways, so Jatoro, I'm sorry for screwing up all of your guys' pronunciation. You guys have definitely nailed me a number of times in terms of mispronouncing names, and it's gonna happen more. Jatoro Kujo asks more music-based history analysis. So I did an episode a while ago about just music that history nerds would like. And by the way, oh god. I'm guessing you're referring to mispronouncing names, and yeah, I don't get any right. I'm sorry. The reason why I don't do analysis of specific history songs all the time is because there's no visual aspect most of the time. I definitely include songs that are about the time. Like, if I talk about Vietnam, you better believe there's going to be some sort of Vietnam protest song somewhere in there. But I more want to talk about the subject matter than analyze the song itself. That's it's a bit tough to make a video on a song. Let's see here. Jackson asks, do you have a plan on doing foreign historical films in the future? I typically avoid foreign films. I I just did one that was technically a foreign film from the British, but I try to avoid ones that are not in English. Um, it's fairly tough to have to do subtitles all the time for something that you want to actually quote. Um, I've thought about it, and maybe in the future, like I really wanted to do a review of I'm forgetting the name of it, Studio Ghibli's like last film with their famous director, which was about the creation of the Zero. um and I haven't even watched it yet because I wanted to review it. uh and yeah, that's kind of tough territory trying to deal with subtitles. Um, so chase. Wow, thank you, Chasing Fiction. Um, wow. So he says, "Great channel, thank you. Um, I earned a degree in history. However, I got a career in aviation, and have been out of college for a while now. Um, I do not fault you in changing careers. Um, I want to get back into reading good history, but without professors. But without professors, what is a good way to find good quality history reads, good resources?" And well, that's a heck of a question. So the the easiest way to try to get at a particular history subject that you want to really dig into is just find the most recent scholastic um, secondary source you can find. So, for instance, let's find an example. Um, say you're doing history of come on here. Say you're doing history of violence in California, right? Um, Probably your best bet to begin with is something like this, Eternity Streak. I think it came out in 2015, 2016. And it's so new I haven't even read it yet. It's on the list. Um, but I know for sure, since I've read his articles, that this is a good starting point. And you just go back to the um, bibliography, you see what's there. This doesn't have a bibliography. I am so disappointed. um, Normally, you just go back to the bibliography, see what's there, see how it's set up in terms of separating the subjects, and then you choose the most recent stuff. And you also try to find out. There's always going to be a section in a book that talks about other historiography, that talks about like previous people talking about this subject. And you look for that historiography section, the history of history. And by doing so, you'll find what they say is like the best book on the subject up until now. Because I mean, part of that is to say like, but I'm going to do something different. But you definitely want to go to that next. What they say is like the best book on the subject. I just wrote a paper on the Mesilla riot in La Mesilla, New Mexico. And it was a political riot that happened in 1871, and 9 people were killed. Literally, Democrats and Republicans facing off against each other in the plaza and started fighting. The most recent book on it, I reference incessantly in that paper. That paper might actually get published in the New Mexico History Review. We'll see. But the main thing is you got to find kind of the newest thing to work your way back on a subject. Or if you're just looking if you're just looking for good reads, it once again also depends on the subject, but a lot of the time you can find it by looking at JSTOR, the online resource for academic papers. A lot of JSTOR stuff you can actually read online. You won't be able to download it, but you can read it online, especially book reviews. So you want to find out whether or not a book is good on a particular subject, you can go to JSTOR, and you don't need a subscription or anything. You can actually find book reviews on that particular subject. And next, in terms of just good primary resources, that's really difficult to say in a broad sense, because it completely, if you're studying medieval history, not my territory. But if you're looking at, like, say, local violence and a particular town, a lot of the time the nearest university will have digital resources on it that you can look up online. This video that I just did a couple days ago, I talked about resourcing in that, and you'll notice that I heavily referenced a website that was called 17 Moments in I have it bookmarked. What is it called? 17 Moments in Soviet History. It is a fantastic primary resource website, and you'll find those especially around big events. So a lot of websites are set up to literally just digitize big big documents of primary resources and put it up online. Google Books is great for that kind of stuff. Say you want to research the Civil War, they have all of the government put together a big compendium of primary resources on the Civil War in I think it was 1875, something like that. And in 1875, they made whatever that year, they put all the letters, like all the letters published, sent to headquarters from both the South and the North. And all of those resources are on Google Books. So it really just depends on what you're looking for on all of that. It's a huge question, so I hope I didn't take up too many people's time. Let's see here. Cameron Burnell asks, would you do more on the USA labor movement? Spelled with an O-U-R. You're coming from Britain. And oh no, that's NZ. I'm guessing you're from New Zealand. So I have done some stuff on the labor movement, but it's not exactly my specialty, except for when violence steps in. I have thought about doing some stuff on mine wars. So there is a historian that I've already referenced in this live stream called Richard Maxwell Brown. He has this whole idea, hopefully I can find it, called the Western Civil War of Incorporation. Here it is. And basically his idea is that, because I study Western history mostly, his idea is that violence in the West followed a particular pattern that was incorporating the American West into the American system. And so his whole idea is that it goes in stages. First, there's the racial incorporation, Indian wars and anti-Hispanic stuff and anti-Chinese, all that kind of stuff, trying to incorporate things into the system. And this is all through violence, by the way. Incorporation is a form of violence in this form. And then there's multiple things, range wars, lynching, all that kind of stuff. But then his final stage is labor. He says, let's see here. In the mines, mills, and logging camps on the wage workers' frontier of the West, workers resisted corporate industrialists with strikes that frequently ended in violence between labor unionists and paramilitary and military forces who joined in an alliance of capitalism and government. Um, so that might be something in the future. I could see doing more on that. I definitely like looking at mine wars. Um, there is a lot of there's I did a historiography paper back in my master's about Blair Mountain, and I've been thinking about doing an entire episode on that because it's a really interesting subject. It's the most bloody civil conflict in U.S. history post Civil War. Um, so that's that's pretty bad. That's a lot of violence. It's not in the West; it's in West Virginia. It's the west of something. But yeah, I might do that at some point. All right, so Scotty Roddy asks, "Do I reenact?" No, not really. I haven't done any kind of reenactment stuff for a long time, and when I'm basically I was part of the SCA, the Society for Creative Acronyms, um, which is like a Ren Fair group. But I was that um, before being a historian. Becoming one kind of made me hate the atmosphere. They kept on telling me things like, you have red on your uniform. They weren't allowed to wear red, and it's like, no, this is Turkish red. This was actually pretty common among the people, and you try to throw facts at them, and they'd just be like, no. I couldn't stand it anymore, or so I stopped being part of that. Nate H. Oh, on the reenactment front though, I also used to be part of the single action. I wasn't a member, I was too young for it, but I used to do stuff with the Single Action Shooter Society. But I still like that stuff. It's not really reenactment or anything, it's just fun going out shooting in the desert, but it's you gotta have fun some way. So Nate H asks, do you think it's important for historians to physically visit locations they study? Yes. And no. So it's a complicated question in that I believe in the idea of participant observation. I just recorded a diatribe on this, but the idea is that you go and try to immerse yourself essentially by going to the location that you're studying, right? But I mentioned earlier that I did a paper on the Masia riot. I have never been in La Masia. Nice thing is I'm in New Mexico, so I'm at least in the state. But it is difficult to say that it's a must, that we should go and visit these places, but I will say that my master's thesis, which was about San Luis Obispo, since I was living there at the time, deeply immersed in the local history. My father was a local historian, for Pete's sake. That was just incredibly helpful. When I talked about things like the massacre that happened at the San Miguel mission in 1848, and the route that the posse was taking to go after them, the route that Jim Beckworth went to go and form good old soon to be General Sherman about the incident. Knowing all of that area, I knew the routes that they were going to take, and I could just figure it out on my own from contextual cues, something you could never have done as somebody who had never visited the place. But I do say there's plenty of historians who do really good work without having ever visited the place. So it's a back and forth. Um, let's see here. Uh, Warfox asks me, "What are your thoughts on George W. Bush?" Eh. I mean, I served under him for a little bit, so uh, I can't be too angry. I know there's a lot of hate against him. A lot of people really despise the guy, but I can't. It's not like I think he blundered us into freaking the Iraq War, and that was a mistake for sure. But I mean, really, what? Well, his handling of Katrina was pretty bad too. I don't really have a president that I've liked since Ike. I think I don't think I've liked any president like actually liked them as a president since Ike. So I can't really say that there's any um thing that any president that I wouldn't have qualms with up until then. And you guys know the one that I really have qualms with is way before Ike. um so yeah, it's I can't say that I like or dislike. Well, I can say I dislike. I can't say I like. Um let's see here. Um the Girthax says, have you ever taken the political compass test? I have taken 4 different versions of it, and I have shown up like center, but like in all 4 quadrants. So, no, I have not actually. One of the quadrants, it's been a long time, but and my politics have definitely changed since then. But I don't think I ever ended up on the authoritarian socialist side. I don't know. I don't really put much credence in such standardized testing. That's more for like rote memorization, which I definitely ask of my students. But more just like know the story that you want to tell. Let's see here. Cameron Burnell asks, episode rating U.S. presidents from best to worst. Oh boy, I don't have any presidents that I can say, that Harding was better than Coolidge, and Coolidge was better than Hoover, and Hoover was worse than FDR. Honestly, I can't really do that. I don't have an objective. Well, anything's going to be subjective, but I don't even have my own subjective way of figuring out what I prefer or not. It just because presidents also are subject to their historical circumstances. Some of them make things worse, Wilson, but there's also ones that I think are just kind of a victim of the times. You'll see a lot of people who are like, was Buchanan, the worst president. You'll see a lot of people on the first Wilson episode saying that, oh, there's a drinking game, by the way, every time I mention Wilson. But, uh-oh, I hope that did my stream just crash? Okay, good. My computer is freaking out about the headphones. But in terms of Buchanan, I think he's kind of a victim of the times. I think that a lot of his decision making was just kind of had to happen. That we put so much hate on him for just being the end of the sectional crisis. After all, most of the states seceded while he was still president. Um, it was, of course, the northern part of the Confederacy, including Virginia, didn't secede until after Fort Sumter. But the most of them were prior to that, and a lot of people will put the blame of the Civil War on his shoulders because, like, he had trouble with the Lecompton Constitution in Kansas, and but that was completely out of his control. He did send a bunch of people to Utah to try to stamp out, because part of the campaigns of that brought him to the presidency was saying that the Republicans were campaigning about this whole idea of the dual evils left over from barbarism, slavery and polygamy, and so he was going after like polygamy, and saying like, oh yeah, that slavery issue, put it away. And a lot of people see that as like causing the Civil War, and yeah, I don't see it as that. So I can't really rank presidents like that. I don't think it's quite fair. And in terms of Wilson, drink up. Wilson, he was one that you could say did long-term damage by his own volition. And that's kind of difficult to do. So I will be I'm working on an episode that is talking about presidential tyranny. And while y'all know that I do not take it easy on Wilson ever, the rest of them I try to be a little more ambiguous and nuanced. Because, well, you have to do that, especially when a lot of these guys aren't trying to be evil. You know, they're not trying to say internment during World War II. Order 66 or 8066, something like that. Which, by the way, Star Wars references. That order to kill all the Jedi in Episode 3. Yeah, that's referencing the internment of the Japanese by FDR. I was about to call him Frederick Jackson Jr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And yeah, he wasn't just doing it out of pure hate. There's definitely a lot of hate built into it. But he was receiving tons of reports of Japanese spies. There was a whole incident on Hawaii of Japanese Hawaiians helping a downed pilot from the Pearl Harbor attacks. There were a couple of bombardments in California and Oregon. The Japanese were raiding shipping right off the coast of California. There was a lot going on than just screw the Japanese, put them in camps. Also, during World War I, there were internment camps of Germans. They really didn't do that much. There weren't really that many people in prison, so you can't exactly lump them all in the same category. But yeah, and yes, Ed, I'm talking about the Battle of Los Angeles. It's not a real battle because it might have been just like a weather balloon. But it's one of those incidents that the Japanese were were blamed for and was used for internment. So yeah, internment is something that I can't say is the worst thing ever. I can't ever say that. Anyways, I took it a little bit easy on Stalin a few days ago, for Pete's sake. That guy was a if you want to label evil on people, that's a pretty good one to do it on. But FDR's internment policy can definitely be defined as tyrannical, and so that's going to be kind of what the episode is about. Is that kind of what is U.S. presidential tyranny? And that's going to be the closest I'll get to rating presidents. Let's see here. Hey, when you guys ask questions, can you put a question mark after some of these things I'm skipping over by accident, not realizing that they're questions? So let's go with the Girthax. Would you think of doing an episode about historical issues related to the band Race Against the Machine? What? Rage Against the Machine has historical issues? I don't know what you're talking about there. Crabbed Sun 10 says, how vital are language skills in historical research? I say, knowing of a professor at Australian National University, having learned German and then researched the German Western Front. Funny enough, ich spreche Deutsch, aber sehr schlecht. I just passed a language exam in German with only this to help me along, and don't tell my professors, and if my professors are watching, keep it secret. I don't know how I passed. Ich bin sehr schlecht. I am very bad at German. Like, I didn't finish the last paragraph that I was supposed to be translating, and somehow I passed. So that is definitely a skill that most colleges love and want to promote, and it's definitely important if you are studying something that requires a different language, but it's becoming less important. So I study the American Southwest quite a bit. You'll find that there's a lot of Spanish here, especially like here in New Mexico. I mean, like, everything is dual language. It's I know a lot of Spanish speakers here that are like, that's just second nature. It's not a big deal. And documents that you might be researching would be in that language. A lot of people in California, for instance, were still writing government documents in Spanish, at least in my county of San Luis Obispo, were writing in Spanish all the way until around 1854. So that's almost a decade into the American period, and they're still writing in Spanish. So yeah, language is really important, but also there's tools for translating now that make it so that you don't really need to be completely fluent. You just need to be good enough. So let's see here. Let's see. The Gearthax asks, a better question would be, would you do a video about workers' rights, workplace democracy movements in America? So I just did I'm still writing it, but I'm doing a bunch of research into veterans history. I'm hoping to put out a video or maybe two. The freaking script is already 10 pages long. That the and single spaced, by the way, that the a lot of veterans history kind of crosses over on that, and I'm reading a lot about how this there's a lot of debate around whether or not the civil rights movement had a huge basis in the whole double V campaign after during and after World War II, victoring at home and abroad, or if it had a lot of basis in the uh, the sit down movement, form of protest that happened in the 1930s, a significant way of nonviolent protest from the workers' movement, from the labor movement. And a lot of folks who worked on figuring out the ideology behind that, porting over Henry David Thoreau, and also kind of working with the emerging figure, little guy named Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah, Gandhi was working with American American labor leaders in terms of formulating the ideas of nonviolent protest based off of Henry David Thoreau. And so I was thinking about doing something about that. That's long away though. I'm not much of a labor historian. I don't really deal with it unless it has to do with violence, and non-violence is not kind of, it is literally the opposite of what I study. So let's see here. Brett asks, do you like ancient or medieval history? Is there any events or people in these periods that interests you? Well, definitely in terms of ancient history, I definitely like philosophers. You can probably tell due to good lord, my headphones are freaking out. Hold on. Sorry about this, guys. All right. So in terms of ancient history, I do a lot of. I'm really interested in the Cynics, obviously. I like a lot of ancient philosophy, and to quote Nietzsche, I'll just grab it. Hold on. To quote Friedrich Nietzsche, early writings. Sorry, guys. It's hard to quote things when you have to find it. This is his first work on history. He actually wrote a few things on history, but in his first work on history, on the utility and liability of history, he writes, perhaps no philosopher is closer to the truth than the cynic. For the happiness of the animal, who is, after all, the consummate cynic, provides living proof of the truth of cynicism. So that's Nietzsche saying that that the cynics had it right. In terms of medieval history, on the other hand, I don't know. It's a pretty alien subject to me. I can't even read Bede, to be honest. I have Bede on the shelf, but the Venerable Bede is difficult to read. Let's see here. Let's do Christian Weibrecht or Weibrecht. I'm guessing Weibrecht. Have you ever played a video made by Blizzard Entertainment? A video? You mean a video game? I don't think I've really touched World of Warcraft, to be honest. I'm not much of an MMO person. Don't really like top-down RPGs, and really, I don't like action RPGs for the most part. I'm a big fan of turn-based RPGs. But I also just don't get to touch video games that often. Although it isn't like Ubisoft owned by Blizzard now or something like that. Blizzard didn't. Oh no, it's Activision. Yeah. Um, I love Assassin's Creed games because history, but at the same time, it's such schlocky bullshit. Oh, it's bad. But as long as you know it's bad, I mean, you're going into a freaking video game. A little going back to the future. Um, let's see here. Benjamin Harry asks, "Will you please do a full video about Sabaton?" I really am tempted to do that. I really am. I love Sabaton. Um, they are an amazing band, but like, I'd have to just kind of do like little mini histories of every song I wanted to talk about. And that's a lot of work. Um, but maybe sometime in the future. I'm just stressed out trying to get enough videos done before school starts up again in the fall, or well, actually in August. So the fall. um, let's see here. Knowing better asks, what mainstream history myth annoys you the most? Uh, general conspiracism. I think any kind of you know the thing that you've been told is not the truth. It's a for I have no proof to back up my claims. I I have done an actual. I'm working on an academic paper that might get published in the public in something. I'm hoping. Not going to name the paper because future projections. But that video I did a while ago about the Vegas shooting and conspiracism around that. That there is a lot of anger behind that video. um, as many of you know, I grew up in Las Vegas, and when the shooting happened, I was made aware of it within minutes. Just my Facebook feed blew up, and people were posting like, "Here's the radio for here's the online access to Metro Police's radio." And I listen in on it. I know some of the people who were Metro Police there. And furthermore, I have when people talk about the official story, um, I my father's kind of one of the people responsible for the official story. Um, he's one like that means that it's deeply personal. When people start saying like, you can't believe that, it's like you're saying I can't believe my own father. um and yeah, the I saw all the conspiracism stuff coming out like that morning. The following morning, people started talking about like, oh, there's a second shooter, and look, it's a pyramid and stuff like that. And it was like everyone I knew was already fed up with it by the following night. And we were all pissed because it's our city, right? This happened to people we knew. And also, as a historian, ultimately we're in charge. My family are in charge of that story. So that's probably my most hated myth. In terms of non non recent stuff, social banditry. Definitely social banditry is something that I every time I find it in a history book, I sometimes break out a red marker and go social banditry, new, and I hate that stuff so much. Um, I did an entire episode on social banditry and why it's a serious problem. I just saw an episode from what's I'm forgetting red and blue. I'm forgetting their name, the channel name. Overly sarcastic productions. They just did one on um, Western history and carefully avoided the whole social banditry issue, which was refreshing to see because I know plenty of professors who don't avoid it at all. In fact, they endorse the whole idea. And it is not only a serious historical problem, it is a serious, freaking serious problem in terms of um, causing violence, further violence. Apparently the trolls are gone. Good. So how do I say that? NGC 4594 asks or says, I may be a bit biased. I may be a bit wasted and have randomly stumbled onto your stream. Bit wasted. Here we go. But I love your videos and respect you. Thank you. So, thank you so much. So Brett asks, what is social banditry? It's basically the idea that, like, it's the Robin Hood myth. The idea that somebody like, let's say, Joaquin Murrieta, that's the one that historians love to bring up. This bandit who was going around killing people and stealing money was somehow fighting the system, man. You can tell. I'm not gonna give it any credence here. I tried to give it a little more justice in the video about it, but here I'm just gonna say it's junk history. It is this whole idea that, like, pirates, Marcus Rediker, he's written a lot about this. That the idea that they are proto-revolutionaries, that they are fighting against a system and maybe making some money on the side. Whereas greed doesn't support that idea. You can't say that you're making a little money on the side. It's the other way around. They're making money. Maybe they started because they were vengeful or something like that. That's not why they're doing it. That's it's a disturbing trend that promotes further violence. Let's see here. And one of the ones that everybody wants to bring up is Ned Kelly, of course. Yes, I know who Ned Kelly is. I briefly mentioned a movie about him in a previous review about Ben Hall. And I can't go into detail about Ned Kelly. I've never really studied the guy, but I don't know. I remember Extra Credits did a video on him. But Extra Credits tends to be willing to engage in some myth making themselves. I don't fault them for that. I mean, I just named a bunch of actual historians who do that, but it's best not to. Let's see here. Cornel Burnell asks, how frustrating do you find political discourse when studying history? Well, when studying it, I find it incredibly interesting. How frustrating do I find the current political discourse about history? Quite frustrating. Oh boy. I mean, I've done videos, several, talking about, like, let's look at something this political figure said, and let's look at the history behind it. And oh, wait, they're talking out their butt. Um, oh, I've done I did that with Obama. I've done it with Trump. So you can't exactly just say I'm some leftist only going after the right, but like um, I did that Australian gun control video a long time ago, and that was totally going after Obama because he was wrong. um, let's see here. Connor Lonergan. Sorry, Lonergam. Sorry. Um, could the history of Somali pirates run the risk of social banditry? Yes. Um, it is very close to having the tone of their right for going after people, despite it being piracy. You know, it's it's definitely running the risk of it. I haven't seen anybody do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's already out there that there's social banditry implied in Somali pirates. So Adrian Wold-Hansen asks, what about the Second World War is the most interesting? Except for anything with the Americans, of course. Well, being an American, I obviously have to go with America. I don't know. To be honest, I've been trying my best to not go down the wormhole of just doing a bunch of World War II videos. There's plenty of that out there. And as a consequence of that, I also kind of avoid World War II as a subject. It's kind of overdone overall, and it's hard to say what I'm most interested in it about when I'm not interested in it for the most part. I will say that you can never really get away from it, right? So, like, I've been doing a bunch of research into veterans history, and of course, veterans history is deeply ingrained in World War II. I'm honestly thinking about splitting the episode right there at World War II because it's such a huge difference, but I might just split it at the Civil War. Either way, veterans history changes because the Veterans Bill of Rights, also known as the GI Bill, was created in 1944, if I remember correctly, during the war. Being a veteran myself, of course, that means I have benefited directly from that program. That's why I joined the military. So let's see here. Joshua Smith says, never stop being fucking the people trying to kill freedom of speech and sanitizing history. Oh, I think you mean bumfucking. Yeah, well, I don't mind going after people who will say something incorrect about history. That's kind of the whole point of the Based on True Story series, right? And especially when it comes to historians who have done bad things, Wilson. That's peer review, so I get to say, yeah, this is wrong and this is bad. And thank you, Joshua Smith, by the way. Let's see here. Stephanie Frost asks, do you have or will you make a video covering the bonus army? That's going to be a pretty big part of the veterans history that I will be putting out, hopefully around November 11th. Um, I will also be talking a little bit about it in an episode that I will be reviewing the movie Patton in the 1970 movie. Let's see here. Wow, a lot of questions. Knowing Better asks, I'll ask again since I'm curious, is there any case of social banditry mythology that you consider valid? Um, I don't know. There's some cases that I could make for social banditry that like the Cortina War in Texas. Um, I could make an argument for that being social banditry. Um, and there's also ones that like seem perfect candidates for social banditry, and nobody wants to make that argument. In the social banditry video, I make an argument that like, look, this guy Black Bart, like, he was out there for greed, but he wasn't hurting anybody. He was just robbing Wells Fargo and afraid of horses, even though he's robbing stagecoaches. Like, what? The guy was kind of kooky. But I don't. I can't name anything off the top of my head that would be like, yeah, this guy is a true social bandit. See here. Brett asks, if you could punch one historical figure, who would it be? Phew. Wilson, of course. You guys are gonna make me need to fill up my glass real quick here, aren't you? How could I not? Especially if I could punch him right before he had one of those strokes and just end it right there. Tom Duke asks, I've been drinking wine. Tom Duke asks, who's my favorite Soviet premier? Probably Khrushchev. The guy was Khrushchev was kooky. Like, I played the clip in the last video about like it's called the kitchen debate. Basically Khrushchev and Nixon. Nixon was vice president at the time. Or Secretary of State. I don't remember. Had a debate over like, who has the best kitchen appliances, capitalism or communism, and and it shows him. I had to keep it in there because it's too funny. Like, he's like, you're a lawyer of capitalism, I'm of communism. Let's kiss. He was that boisterous. He was fun. Everything you read from him is just fun to read. The guy just was considered to be a peasant, and like, you got to understand that Bolshevism, while talking about like being the vanguard of the people and all that, they have this tendency to come from upper class, and also communism in general has this tendency to kind of push peasantry as a class away. All communist countries have had trouble dealing with that ideological dissonance. And yet Khrushchev was like, screw it, let's bring corn to the Caucasus. Like, he was great. Funny guy. Let's see here. Would you ever think, John Nelson asked, would you ever think of making a video or series about the Reconstruction era? I try not to do like general histories, I feel like what I'd want to say is so much that either I'd have to oversimplify it or not. But I will say I have a review that I have already converted and is ready to upload and everything, on Mudbound, and it does talk about Reconstruction era Mississippi. I also did one on the Free State of Jones, and that talks about Reconstruction. So I like to hit those subjects from other angles than just like this is the history of Reconstruction. Um, let's see here. Bounty Flamer um, asked me what is my opinion on the war in Afghanistan. Having fought in that war, I can't hate it. But I will say I think it's gone a little too long, guys. You know, get in and get out. I remember when I joined when I well, I didn't voluntarily go to Afghanistan, but we were our unit was in the process of deploying to Iraq, and it was a volunteer mission. And I was like, I'm staying here. I'm going to freaking school. Screw you guys. And then like 2 or 3 months later, they call everybody and go like, yeah, it's no longer a volunteer mission, but we're going to Afghanistan instead. And I was like, damn it. But also, thank God it's the good war. I remember thinking that. Thinking that like when compared to Iraq, Afghanistan was the good war. I will say we've been there for too long though. Wars of occupation is something that we've been doing since, well, you could say the Philippines. Philippines is a bit different because we were literally invading the country. But the Wilson is definitely the main person for this kind of foreign occupation kind of thing. Also, Wilson. So, let's see here. I saw something from Grant Hurst. Ah, there you are. If you were a national leader, and you could pick 3 historical figures to act as your brain trust, who would they be? A national leader of the U.S., right? So let's see here. Well, you have to have a jingoistic side, right? Yeah, you have to have the one that has mass appeal, but also like, you know, kind of secretly a dick. Teddy Roosevelt, who was a historian, by the way. Actually, kind of an interesting historian, and I've been thinking about doing a historians who changed history on just him. Second, George F. Kennan. Definitely George F. Kennan. That guy was a political genius. If you ever read anything from George F. Kennan, who later became a historian, and I did a episode on him, he was one of Truman's wise men, and like just knew how to handle international politics in a way that hadn't really been pushed since Wilson. He really fought against Wilsonianism. Then let's see here. So that's 2 out of 3. Who would the third be? National advisor. I'm kind of at a loss, guys. Let's just go all the way back. Thomas Paine. That guy. Thomas Paine was a kind of a firebrand when it came to the revolution. A lot of our Declaration of Independence is actually quoted from him. And he kind of inspired the whole anti-monarchism thing. I saw somebody earlier asking what my opinion of monarchism is, and no. No, I don't support monarchy. I'm an American, come on. But Thomas Paine kind of pushed the whole Um, let's let's talk about John Locke. Let's bring out, um, let's take away all this familial heredity stuff. Um, enough with these titles. Let's level everything. He was a great advocate of leveling. So those would be my three advisors: Teddy Roosevelt, George F. Kennan, Thomas Paine. Um, so let's see here. Justin Roig asks, "What is my most hated Oliver Stone movie?" Oh boy. Uh, let's see here. JFK, definitely. That that movie has spurned on a thousand conspiracy theorists. Um, that movie is the Helen of Troy, um, uh, for conspiracism. And conspiracism is probably the most hated thing by most historians. I actually have a list of like the 10 most hated things by historians, and that's top of the list. So let's see here. Guka, I hope maybe Guka, would you do a history on political ideologies? As I said earlier in the stream, I tried not to do too large of subjects like that. Like political ideologies are just, it's an entire branch of philosophy, and um I wouldn't really have a way of simplifying it into 20 or even 50 minutes. That would be an entire class, and I don't know how I could do that. That being said, I have done episodes, like one of my really early episodes is talking about like the philosophy behind the U.S. Constitution, and why we should probably look less at the intent of the framers and more at the intent of the philosophers, if we want to play the whole intent game. So I do try to throw in some intellectual history, but I've been moving further and further away from intellectual history as a historian, and it doesn't seem to be coming back. I study more and more violence, and intellectual history tends to be the opposite of American violence. But as I mentioned, I might do an episode sometime about nonviolence, because that too is, I mean, while it's the opposite of violence, obviously, it has a really interesting history. And I think I could distill that down into a 10 to 20-minute video. So, hey, David Dillon, I see you all over the place. Who was this is, I don't know, man. That's an odd question. Let's see here. A radical number asks, what time period do you think most confusing in U.S. history? For me, it'd have to be the Gilded Age. Some historians would actually say we're living in the Second Gilded Age. There's actually a lot of scholarship saying this is the Second Gilded Age that we're in. But most confusing, it depends by region, of course. Like for California, the gold rush is just like, I have I think 11-minute video on it, and even there it's just a bewildering amount of stuff happening. Nationally though, I made this argument in my 1919 video, is that the first Red Scare was just crazy. But in terms of just like a period rather than just a year, probably the I think you're screwing with me, David Dillon. The Probably the craziest in terms of national history, though, in terms of just an era, would be the interwar period between, or the sectional crisis, as it's often called, between 1848 and 1861. Just so, like, there's a clear path that everything was going towards. That, like, when in hindsight, it's 2020 sometimes, and in this, it's like everything's talking about slavery everywhere. Everybody's like fighting over it, and there's just fighting everywhere. Um, there's literally people fighting each other in Congress, like beating each other with canes. And like Kansas is just is called Bleeding Kansas for a reason. You have the gold rush and everything in the West suddenly coming to being, and like everybody arguing over what the heck is supposed to happen with that. That's kind of what caused the Civil War. Um, trying to figure out if slavery should continue to go west. And so all of that happening at once. I have a professor. I left it sitting in my car. His book is Frontier Regulars or something like that. It's talking about the army in the West, and it is crazy. During the 1850s. So yeah, the sectional crisis is probably the craziest era from 1848 to 1861. Let's see here. Next, Eli asks, what are the best books on U.S. history for general understanding? Yikes! I don't really have any specific recommendation for general history of the U.S. There's plenty of textbooks. I kind of like it's called A Patriot's History in the United States, and even though it has this like implication of being like this orthodox history, it's actually pretty good. It gives a more nuanced view. It is still kind of orthodox, but I'd prefer an orthodox perspective over a revisionist one. Sorry. At least when it comes to like an overall understanding, because to me, you have to start with orthodoxy to be able to revise it, right? That's the only way to deal with it. So let's see here. Ostad the Dark asks, why did the U.S. symbolize fireworks use on the 4th of July, and why did it stick? Fireworks have been historically used for celebration since before guns were invented. Fireworks predate guns. And it's become such an ingrained part of not just Western culture, but especially Chinese culture, actually, that it was just commonplace to use fireworks for any kind of celebration by the time the 4th of July was being celebrated. So that's why it stuck. Why did it become the thing that we think of with the 4th of July as opposed to like any other special event, say for, I guess, New Year's? Well, the 4th of July is celebrating a time of war, I guess you could say. So maybe the use of lots and lots of gunpowder is somewhat symbolic of it, but that's just a guess. Let's see here. So Cameron Burnell asks, says a statement with a question mark. Will I do a video on the development of weapons technology? I've been thinking about doing something just like that. I wouldn't say of like all weapons ever, but maybe like a here's a flintlock, here's a cap and ball gun, here's trapdoor Springfield, then a uh, Craig Jorgensen Springfield. I don't have a Craig Jorgensen though, so I couldn't show that. I'd have to talk about it without showing it. But I do have enough of them to talk about like the evolution of U.S. riflemen's arms. I have thought about that, yeah. But I also don't have any of that stuff here. It's just back in Nevada. Um, let's see here. Still working on it. As how? Wait, how much did I drink? I don't know what you mean by that. How much do I drink? A lot. Need more wine. Let's see here. Joshua Hole asks, do you like alternate history or does that not interest you? I'm afraid not. No, it does not. Not only does it not interest me, but sometimes I see it as somewhat harmful. At least I wouldn't say that. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate it. I don't. Well, I don't think that it's dumb or anything like that. I think that it can be a bit misplaced sometimes. You'll see a lot of folks talking about let's see here, talking about like, what if the Confederacy won or something like that. And then they will actually postulate things as truths and argue with each other over like what is possible. And that's just wrong-headed. I think that if you use alternate history as anything other than fiction, you're going the wrong way. If you think that it's anything other than just like a game for having fun, you're going the wrong way. I think that historical fiction and alternate history are basically the same thing, but for some reason, people put them. Well, no, historical fiction actually pretends to have some sort of accuracy, but then will say, this could happen, and not saying this would. And that's the difference. So, speaking of that, Earl Grando asked if I've seen the CSA, and yeah, I have. I think it's silly as all heck. Kind of fun at points, but also at points they take themselves way too seriously. Alternate history is not history. It's not doing that, and it can also be quite a distraction from the actual history profession, because you'll see people talking about like actual events and then jump to alternate history, and that can distract the entire conversation from something that might have actually been productive. And so, yeah, it's, and as Earl Grando says, it's silly but fun. And I get that. I definitely get the silly and fun part. It's just, don't take it seriously. Did I just use a bicycle pump on my mind? Yeah, yeah. Actually, it's sucks out the air from the wine. It makes it last longer. I don't know if I'll get through a bottle of wine in one day. That I don't drink that much. Let's see here. Still working on it asks, what are some of the most successful guerrilla campaigns? The American Revolution. The most successful guerrilla campaigns are the ones that that not only manage to kick out the invading power or the British weren't an invading power. Um, the American colonies were British, but um, you know, that start as a guerrilla movement and turn into a powerful army. So, like Vietnam, for instance, not really a successful movement. They're still really hurt from that. Um, Eventually, they won, but they had to lose to get there. Um, so yeah, like I wouldn't call that a successful guerrilla movement, but I would say something like uh, the Chinese Revolution was began as a guerrilla movement, turned into proper military movement because they were winning the war. Um, that's what the power of guerrillas is, that they can fight low level warfare and turn into greater warfare. Knowing better, you've been drinking from box wine all the time. I lived in California, man. I can't drink from box wine anymore. um, so let's see here. Warfox asks, "What are your thoughts on the Cuban Revolution?" That's an example of a successful guerrilla fight, right? Where it turns from guerrilla fighting to full out warfare, and it worked. What's my view of Cuba? It's a pretty repressive government in many ways, um, and continues to be. Um, how much of that is from the U.S. blockade? I don't know. I don't study the subject. Oh, I think one of the drinking things is if I say I don't know. Um, Papadoran asks, "Will you do a war on the 1812? Will I do a video on the War of 1812?" Um, and maybe I like doing these ones that I've been doing recently about like, you know, what caused the American Revolution, what caused the Civil War, what caused the U.S. intervention in the World War One. I the Pearl Harbor video was also kind of a what caused World War, or what brought the U.S. into World War Two, because it's actually more than just like, oh, Pearl Harbor, duh. And that is also interesting in terms of 1812, because there was a bunch of lead up to it. You know, you had the I'm not going to remember any of the names. There were a couple ships that were captured by the British, and there's a couple of diplomatic disputes. There was a border issue in what's now Maine. Yeah, there's a lot of lead up to it, so maybe sometime. But my next one that I'm planning on doing is on that front is the U.S. Mexico War. The U.S. Mexico War has a heck of a build up to it. You know, you basically have to start with the build up to the Texas Revolution, and then go from there to the U.S. Mexico War. And it's a lot more nuanced than like the U.S. just wanted to take over Mexico. There's definitely part of that, but it's not that simple. It's also not as simple as like we were defending our freedom. So yeah, I might do that on 1812 eventually, though. So let's see here. How did U.S. British relations improve after the War of 1812 and the Revolution? Slowly, but also quickly. Militarily, they were like instantly best buds after the Revolution. You find U.S. What are they called? Revenue cutters, like working hand in hand with British naval personnel, and that like immediately after the signing of the peace treaty. And same thing with the War of 1812. But at the same time, you can't just look at the military to say how things are, right? And it's a lot more complicated when it comes to civilians. See here. Still working on it. So as a former Marine, what would be your important advice to a modern guerrilla? I was never a Marine, I was a soldier. Um, but for modern guerrillas, well, most modern guerrillas are trying to fight big countries with they're not trying to be successful. They're just trying to outlast. And at that point, they're already doing exactly what they need to be doing. It doesn't. All they need to do is like kill 1 or 2 Americans a year, and the war's still on. A good example of this is Nicaragua when we took over there for a long time, and we were there from what 1914 to 1934 or something like that. And yeah, it was like 1 or 2 Americans killed a year for about a decade until the Sandino party started actually coming up. And that's a good way of maintaining that, like, hey, you need to get out of here. Hey, you need to get out of here. Yeah, but I feel like I'm giving advice to the enemy, though, because our country's always going to be the big, powerful ones now. Guka asks, would I do a video on fascism? I've been thinking about doing a video on Schindler's List. A lot of people have requested that over time, but it's a huge subject. Like, I've done a few videos about genocides, like just straight up genocides. I did one on The Promise, which was about the Armenian genocide. Did one on Hotel Rwanda, which talks about the Hutus and the Tutsis. And in those, I don't just talk about like, like with Hotel Rwanda, I don't just say like the president got shot down in a plane and suddenly there was a genocide. I go back to like the 19th century and work my way forward. And that's what I'd have to do with Schindler's List. But man, first of all, it's just so contentious. Like it's a really difficult walk. At least with these other ones, like the neo Young Turk people, those the genocide deniers, not the news organization, the pundits. Yeah, let's call them pundits. They're less in number. Neo-Nazis, on the other hand, there's a lot of them. So doing a video on Schindler's List is like inviting another one on, like, you guys remember that slavery video I did a while back? And some of you might have been subscribers when the comments were still going. Oh, that turned nasty. And I think that's probably what would happen on Schindler's List. Some of these ones I can deal with the nastiness, but other ones, it's just, I have to see everything in my feed. And like, I don't want to sit there for weeks on end having to see a freaking like, you stupid Jew, and freaking all that kind of stuff. I don't have it in me. I have better things to do than deal with those idiots. So Thoths that's a god. Thoths Prentice. Worst atrocity the U.S. ever did in and and what we would consider a just war, like World War II or the Civil War. Um, well, you'll find a lot of people who are going to argue against the Civil War for being a just war. I would definitely argue for. But in terms of worst atrocity, huh? I guess the nuclear bombs could easily say that, but no, that took less lives than the fire bombings. So, or let's just say the bombings of Japan um, took millions of lives. Um, yeah, we can argue over its necessity and whether it was right and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not actually gonna. I would never argue that it was wrong to drop the bomb. Um, but still have to call it an atrocity, um, whether or not it's right or wrong. So that's probably the worst. Let's see here. Oh, knowing better actually put thought is knowing better has it right. The the concentration camps during the Philippine War. Yes, yes, that was the worst thing. We basically rounded up entire islands, put them into concentration camps under horrible conditions, and then set up kill orders for anybody who was outside of that. Interesting thing is that's actually a holdover from the Indian Wars. We did that a lot with reservations. That essentially any Indian who was found off of a reservation was free to kill. It's pretty bad. Although those were done under a treaty system, kind of not. Look at the Navajo, for instance. The Navajo definitely didn't sign a treaty to go to Bosque Redondo. So I guess you could say that whole thing. Funniest part of that, not Bosque Redondo or anything, but later on when the whole reservation system was set up and Indians found off of the reservation. You've probably heard off the reservation as somebody who's gone crazy and is like doing things. That's actually a racist term referring to Indians going off the reservation, like Geronimo, and going and killing and marauding, and we got to go kill these guys. So maybe that could be the worst atrocity, but that's kind of like so much of American history. Let's see here. Justin Roy asks, any movies on the Russian intervention you can recommend? There is a TV show from the British called Ace of Spies. It's about Stephen Riley, who's been called the Ace of Spies. The guy was amazing. He is really gone after. Hold on a second. Let me grab the book. He has really gone after in what is this called? The Great Conspiracy Against Russia. But he he was basically a proto James Bond. In fact, Ian Fleming cited Stephen Riley as being an inspiration for James Bond. And Stephen Riley was there during the Russian intervention. He campaigned for the Americans to go the rest of the way down the railroad to Moscow. Some American units were actually pretty close. And the in the movie, the TV show gets it right. It's just like denied left and right. Also, there is Dr. Zhivago, which is an absolute classic. Somewhat mentions it. You'll never find any movie that's directly talking about the Russian intervention. In fact, I don't really know that many movies about the Russian Civil War in general. But Yeah, Dr. Zhivago is an absolute classic. It's one of those ones up there with like Spartacus and that. So definitely watch that. Um, let's see here. Lindsay Manning um, ask uh, what is a historical book you would never recommend? Uh, anything from O'Reilly. Any of that freaking killing Patton crap. Um, I actually read like the first and last chapter of it and skimmed some of it and was first of all, it's actually not like bad history. It's just the most orthodox, uncontentious pablum. Um, just any of those ones where it's like a commentator who decided to write a book about a like there's a British the British guy with the Donald Trump hair. Forgetting his name. Uh, I want to call him Boris Yeltsin for some reason. Maybe his first name's Boris. Um, he uh, he wrote a book about Churchill, and oh, it's god awful. It's I mean it's I shouldn't say it's not bad historically. It's just the kind of history that we should be done with. That we shouldn't be writing anymore. Boris Johnson. Yes. Everybody's just Boris Johnson. Um, yeah, I won't say that he was writing badly. I'm just saying those are the kinds of books that we don't need anymore, especially when it comes to Churchill. Ugh, like, there's so much written about the guy. Like, do something new or don't do it at all. Like you're not contributing to history if you're just repeating a bunch of other historians. Um, at that point, you're not really a historian. Um, you have to bring something new to the field to be a historian. Um, so, Tales of History, I remember your show. Wish you'd publish more. Um, hey, are you still experiencing demonetization issues? Quite the opposite, actually. I just had a bunch of videos reviewed that have been sitting unreviewed for over a year. Um, I don't know how this happened. I really don't. I just get an email every once in a while like your thing has been reviewed and it's good for monetization. It's like you could have done that a year ago. um, let's see here. Uh, John Nelson, would you ever cover Simone Bolivar? I just wrote a paper that included stuff about him. Um, it's funny. One of Marx's like so something about Marx, Karl Marx, that you have to that a lot of people like. Yes, I read Karl Marx. Um, I'm a historian. I have to. Um, but something that's interesting about him is his early stuff is like full of fiery rhetoric. The Communist Manifesto is just actually kind of fun to read. It's a good read. Um, but then like Das Kapital is just, ugh. Um, like it's it's good philosophy, yes. It's just boring. But he wrote about Simone Bolivar, and he really didn't like that guy. Um, he he wrote a letter just talking about how like this guy's become a tyrant. He's not true revolutionary. Blah blah blah. It's great. And I was more talking about filibustering in that paper, talking about like the changeover from filibustering in the maritime pirate sense to William Walker. But then Yeah, it's weird because Simone Bolivar could be considered a filibuster. Like for instance, if you call um, John C. Fremont, the California war hero, a filibuster, then you have to call Simone Bolivar a filibuster. Um, and by the way, filibuster is derogatory, at least in by most historians' standards. There's a little bit in there where it was becoming an okay term to use. Um, but hashtag Marx did nothing wrong. um, but yeah, Simone Bolivar is an interesting figure because he kind of straddles that line between like um, being a bandit trying to steal a country and being a legitimate revolutionary. Um, and like he's definitely a revolutionary, but also like has one foot in the I'm a bad guy sense, you know. Um, so Pinfold 1000. By the way, I did cover Iran Contra in the William Walker video. Um, so I mean, I only briefly covered it because I was just trying to do a U.S. Nicaragua relations bit. But yeah, it's in there, and I don't think there's really much more to go into on it. It's not really that complicated of an issue. It's just it's complicated only in the fact that like um, Oliver North decided to shred all the documents. You know. Um, okay, so let's see here. What's my opinion of Mikhail Bakunin? Bakunin, whew, the bomb thrower in chief. I'm actually a big. Some of you may know my my actual political position has varied a lot since I was a high schooler, and I was a teenage anarchist. Um, when I left basic training, I left a compendium of Emma Goldman on the drill sergeant's desk. Um, so yeah, I was I liked a lot of it, but at the same time, um, there's I can't really remember much of Bakunin because it's been so long since I read him. Um, so there is no I in communist. Yes. um. So Thomas Anderson asks, "What is your favorite weapon system from history?" Um. It's funny, like I don't really talk about gun history and that anymore, but I'm a big fan of the channel Forgotten Weapons. You guys might know of it. If you're into like weird guns that you just didn't know about, go check that channel out. Forgotten Weapons talks about a lot of that kind of stuff. And but hmm, oh, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's a Czech machine gun that when I was sat down in front of it and told to shoot, and it was like you shoulder the gun. It was on a tripod, um, and put it up and click. Nope. So you go to his and the person who gave it to me just he already knew what was happening, right? So he's just sitting there like, yep, this is gonna be funny, and I'm just sitting there like trying to find the charging lever, and he's just sitting, and I'm over there like, how do I do this? Like, where's the charging lever? And he's just sitting there like, find it, just find it. Eventually, I find this little lever on the side of the pistol grip, and you press it, and it goes. You cock the thing by literally cocking it with the pistol grip, and it's just the funniest thing to watch somebody sit there and struggle to figure out how to shoot the damn thing. Um, I used to have Enfield that was converted to 22. So I'd sit there and make a big show of loading it, acting like I was loading like a freaking 303 into it, and then never show them that I put a 22 in it, right? And this thing's a fully weighted Enfield. They just put a 22 sleeve in there. This was actually a World War I gun, and you put it in and hand it over to them, and they're all sitting there, and you make a big like shoulder it, put it really hard. It's going to have a heck of a kick, and then they go pew. And then the best reaction I got from that was, "Did I break it?" Oh man, so that kind of stuff. George Erickson asks thoughts on the Gulag Archipelago. That guy was angry. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name or remember it. It's Soltz. Yep, not gonna remember it. It's almost there, but the he wrote another book, like the life of Ivan Devinovich or something like that. It was a reference to another Russian author that I'm forgetting the name of, and that one's a lot better. The reason why the Gulag Archipelago is so famous is because it is so fiery. Fiery when you're in a gulag. Ha! Siberia doesn't have fire. But it's he's an interesting figure himself. I'm not going to remember the name. Sorry. Here, actually, I could just search it. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Sorry. Because if I remember correctly, he was like he was arrested for like propaganda at the end of World War II. So he wasn't like one part of the purges, right? So, and it was just like he basically said something like, "I am not entirely satisfied with the way the war is going," and everybody is everybody just kind of had to watch themselves in the language that they used at that point, and that guy that kind of went through hell. So it's understandable why he was so angry. But I like in the video I just did, I did one. I talked about Into the Whirlwind, and that book is just so well written. It's a memoir of somebody who got purged in like 38, ended up not being forgetting the word for it, brought back from the gulags until like 1963 or something like that, or maybe that's when it was published. Either way, it wasn't until like the 50s or 60s that she came back, and whew, boy, she went through hell too. But like, it's just better written. I really like that book. So let's see here. Grant Hurst asks thoughts on the recent passing of Bernard Lewis. Isn't that a civil rights leader? Something like that? No, he's a British guy. I don't know him actually. Oh, that's a drink thing. Let's see here. Whoa, I can't really tell you anything about him. I don't really know the guy. See here. would I Ryan Ramkala would I ever cover denial in more detail? That's one of those ones that I don't want to. I don't want to deal with the comments. Um, like I try to be fair to people and like talk to them and like interact with the comments. I don't want to like have to say I'm not dealing with that comment section. I hate doing that. And I've like that's what happened with the slavery video is that eventually I just was like it was getting to the point that literally I was just looking at like my phone going through comments and I'd see the slavery video over and over again. I'd just skip every single comment because they were so horrible. And eventually I just disabled comments on it because I didn't want to deal with it. And I feel like that would happen if I did denial. Um, I really want to be able to engage with you guys, and when there's that much hate in the comments, it makes it not worthwhile. So, probably not. But then again, if I do Schindler's List, I'll be dealing with the same people anyways. Warfox asks, will I cover Hostiles? Yes, and I am almost done editing it. I really like it. See here, Knowing Better asks, who is the worst big name history YouTuber? Not. Trying to trap me. I'm not getting trapped. NGC4594 asks, if you ignore any topic for which you will have jerks commenting, aren't you going to skip a lot of topics? So it's not that it's just a lot of jerks commenting. There's always going to be jerks in the comments. You know, sometimes you just like you have to develop an iron skin to do what I do here, and I noticed that there's a lot of other history YouTubers on here as well, and we all have to have like a thick skin to deal with the comments. But there's a difference between like dealing with some genocide deniers from Turkey or dealing with the 300 a couple million people who are going after you constantly. When the slavery video was going, it was like a comment every, I don't know, 30 seconds. And I mean, long after its release. I didn't disable comments until like November. And I was here getting my dissertation and I was like, I'm tired of looking at my phone and just seeing somebody, those freaking Jews were the one man is, and I couldn't stand it any further. That's what I want to avoid. Bad comments are always going to be there. Like, I mean, just go to, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say bad comments, but just hateful ones with the last video. And I deleted one comment who denied the Holodomor. That's the only comment I deleted. I will delete conspiracy theories. I will delete genocide deniers, which are basically conspiracy theorists. That is anything that's pushing a myth that could be harmful. That I will delete, but otherwise I try not to. So it's difficult to determine what will devolve. But like even the 13 hours comments section, it's devolved. It's completely just full of like, you stupid liberal, blah. And you're a Hillary supporter. I didn't vote for Hillary. I didn't vote for Trump either. I'll say that. Didn't vote for either of them. but I was also living in California, so my vote didn't really count. California was going to Hillary no matter what. Um, I watched some people in a bar that night get in a fight over freaking somebody just walking in with a MAGA hat. That was hilarious. I think we're cutting a little off topic. Let's see here. George Erickson asks, "Did I vote Stein?" No, absolutely not. And I will not vote for somebody who is proposing like getting rid of vaccinations. Oh, um, well, not getting rid of, but like openly pushing that kind of myth making. The Light of God asks, "What is the meaning of life?" Shouldn't you know that? Isn't it your job to tell us? Just saying. Brett asks, "Would I vote Stalin?" No, of course not. He's a monster. But personal opinion. That like can't, as a historian, I can't say that. But yeah. Then again, I'm a big fan of Slavoj Žižek. You know, he's always talking Slavoj Žižek. I like Stalin. He he's a Stalinist. I'm a big fan of Slavoj Žižek. Let's see here. Thoughts of Princess asks, "What doth life?" If you're asking a historian what the meaning of life is, you've lost track of what we do. Our entire profession is about like, don't do this. So if you're asking that, are you asking if you should commit suicide? Although, speaking of philosophers, if oh shoot, what's his name? He was a Nazi. Heidegger. He said philosophy is the art of death facing. So see here, Grad Yarev, Stalin versus Wilson running for president. Who would I vote for? Let's see here. Probably Wilson. Yeah, I know. Like Wilson was bad, but he wasn't Stalin bad. Yet again, I'm breaking ambiguity there. No, I can't technically say that, but that's just me. It's personal. So let's see here. Ravenclaw Girl 22 asks, "What are your opinions on Animal Farm?" So I'm a big fan of Orwell's fiction. Somebody earlier asked, "What about Orwell's nonfiction?" And yeah, I can't really speak to that because I think I read like Trip to Catalonia or something like that. I forget the name of the book. I read that when I was like 20, and only snippets, so I can't tell you anything about that. But Animal Farm is based on a true story. Seriously, Animal Farm is like everybody knows it's basically like about the Russian Revolution, right? And how it turned to Stalinist purges. You know, everyone is equal, but some are more equal, right? Is the famous quote. And, you know, you even have like a stand in for Trotsky in that. And I kind of like Trotsky. I know that that's kind of bad, but like not as an ideologue, but as a character. he's like this insane military leader who just like had no clue what he was doing, just blundering through the Russian Revolution, and somehow he won. Like, it's when you look at what he was doing, he shouldn't have won, but somehow did. Um, as a military leader, he's fascinating. Um, Also, my version of Das Kapital is abridged by Trotsky, and has a forward where he's just because it was abridged in like 1938, and like he is just sitting there, um, just going after Stalinist Russia, and like just totally denouncing the entire Bolshevik project. Um, I kind of love it for that. But and also his version of Das Kapital actually is legible. You know, Das Kapital sucks to read, and that one's fun to read. Um, but Orwell's fictionalizing of it's based on a true story. It's that that is that is based on a true story. Um, just because it's done with pigs and that, and with animals, doesn't make it any less of based on a true story. And when it comes to that, it's incredibly one-sided. I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I like that side, but the best based on a true story stuff is more ambiguous. It's a powerful work, but it needs to be more ambiguous to be a good based on a true story, when looked at it through that lens. Um, see here, Wee Boy asked, "Do I like movies other than historical ones?" And yeah, um, like during the school year, I basically stopped watching historical movies because there's like the ones that I dislike are the hardest ones to get through, for obvious reasons. But also, like if I have to sit there and take notes, like the notes that I take, like for instance, Hostiles is a fictional movie, right? Um, but there's 2 pages of notes for it. Um, like let's see here, we just did Death of Stalin. There are 3 pages of notes for Death of Stalin, and I have to take that while I'm watching it, right? So it's like watching anything historical, kind of I have to avoid it during the school year. So I watch a lot of science fiction. I'm a huge science fiction fan. Um, so let's see here. NGCS on my master's or PhD masters. I mean, what? No, PhD. Jesus. I'm a PhD student. This is my second year coming up. Um, I have a master's. Got it from Cal Poly. Let's see here. Lindsay Manning asks, "What's the most inaccurate documentary you've ever seen?" So there's a lot of left wing documentary stuff. Oliver Stone. What's the Fahrenheit 9/11 guy? Forgot that his name. Whatever. Those things are bad. Like they're not only like they're not only pushing an agenda, but they're pushing an agenda through falsehoods over the veneer of telling truth. At least when movies do it, it's like, there are certain licenses that are okay and like understandable, and then there's ones that are like, you could have done better, movie, you failed me. But when it comes to documentaries, like there is no room for any of that. There's none of the. There is absolutely no room for artistic license. Um, okay, I should say. I mean, I'm basically making documentaries, right? And I make mistakes all the time, for sure. And I might make another episode on that. I've already done one, but like, you know, still make them. Can't stop making them. Wish I could. Um, but there's a difference between an honest mistake and a bad one, like one that like you're intentionally peddling falsehoods to proliferate your own political viewpoint. Um, that's where people like to do that's propaganda. And well, I don't think it's technically propaganda. It is misinformation. Um, and misinformation, especially from documentaries, is bad. And yes, Michael Moore is definitely one of those. Um, so yeah, it's kind of weird. You have to balance on that. I know I caught a lot of flack on the last video about like people thought I was advocating censorship. I was not, but I was advocating like you know, do I do I was advocating understanding why the Russians would censor that movie. I wasn't saying they should. I wasn't saying that censorship is a good thing. But that movie's disinformation. It's not on the level of Michael Moore, though. Michael Moore's way worse. And there's also a reason why I don't review documentaries, because I'd be absolutely ruthless. And also, it just wouldn't be any fun. Um, how, how are important how important are memes in history? Um, I don't know. um, let's see here. Oh wow, Melon Better, you've been around for a while. What is the biggest mistake you've made in a video? And what video do you regret making the most? The one I regret making the most was an opinion piece on Charlottesville. I actually delisted that. Um, shamelessness is a virtue. That's a cynical saying. So, like, I took that down because I was pissing off people. Because I basically said, like, first of all, I pissed off the like alt-right people because I was like, denounce them, denounce them, denounce them. And then I was like, we shouldn't be taking down statues. Like, leave them. That was my thing. I had a whole spiel on it. I think I would love to put on an Indiana Jones hat and go run up to the Nazis and go like, it belongs in a museum. But yeah, I had to take it down because it just was. Now that's not a mistake though. That is just pissing off people and just deciding, you know what, let's not piss off people this much. The biggest mistake though, I've made a lot of mistakes. I think the one that I regret the most is that I talked about this in the mistakes video. I was talking about the Battle of Blair Mountain, and I said miners dropped bombs from planes. Those were miners, but normally who are talked about in terms of miners during the Battle of Blair Mountain are the Unionists. And the Unionists were not the ones dropping bombs. They were the ones having bombs dropped on them. There were miners on both sides. So I really regret doing that. Um, that's probably the worst one I can think of. Um, so let's see here. One Ravenclaw asks if I would like to go to Volgograd, or which was Stalingrad during the war, um, or any Soviet city that held a battle. I'm not really a battlefield tourist. I mean, I remember going to Gettysburg and really having a fun time there, but Volgograd is a really different place from its Stalingrad days. Um, I don't know what I'd get out of going to that. If I was going to, oh no, wait, Vladivostok. I would love to go to Vladivostok. Uh, it's Siberia, yeah, but like I don't know. I've been big into Russian intervention stuff, and man, that was like the capital of the Russian intervention. Um, but not really for like. See, as a historian, my interest isn't like going and sightseeing. My interest is like, what archives can I get into? But I don't read Russian, so I wouldn't really have anything to do there. um, so let's see here. Joni for real says, which century is more fun to study historically, 20th or 19th? 19th. Yeah. I study mostly 19th century. I'm a modernist, so like I'm not going to try to say like it's the best century, but like in terms of just in terms of large change, which I mean, like, what is history besides change over time? The difference between um, 1840 to 1940 versus like 1910 to um, 2010, like 1910 is a lot more recognizable to people in 2010 than 1940 is to people in 1840. Um, so yeah, I'd definitely be more interested in 19th century. It's what I study the most, though. So more violence. Um, see here. I can't read that, but something in Russian says pro or con Napoleon. Um, I don't really have that kind of thing with historical figures. I don't. He has his good. He has his bad. Um, he has, you know, it, my whole idea is tried to be more ambiguous. So, like, did him installing his what was it, his brother or something like that in Spain? Is that good? No. Was the Napoleonic Code good? Yeah. Um, was trying to, you know, cross the get all of Europe in one place so that France could have its Lebensraum. No, but it's complicated. Um, so wrong think Wasian um asks, so on the whole Wilsonian versus realist thing, who came up with the name realists for them, and why do we not hear about them? It's a good questions, and I can't really answer that. Um, I've I've seen the term realist used since at least 1930 in referring to the older ideal of international interaction. Um, but the whole inter how do I say this? The term Wilsonian as a predominant form as the predominating form of international interaction wasn't really coined until the 1950s. So realism predates Wilsonianism not only in like actual formation, but also in the term. So I can't give you much more than that. But why is Wilsonianism powerful now? Basically, it's weird because Wilsonianism gives an impetus that's really powerful for interventions. This idea of humanitarian intervention, that you're only killing them for their own good. Obviously, I don't like that. Wilson is my most hated president. But you can understand the appeal of it. It gives a reason. You're fighting for democracy. You're going to, save the entire world by imposing a ideology on somebody else. That's the whole idea of Wilsonianism, and that's why it's also remained really predominant, because it's a way of justifying war, and it's a way of justifying hegemony. And I mean, us Americans benefit tremendously from Wilsonianism. It's really bad. I mean, it's led to basically every intervention since then. But, besides Vietnam, we've basically benefited from every intervention. And, like, whether or not you agree with them, we've definitely benefited. So, Ryan Ramkil, I'm sorry, man, Ramkilawan, right? I don't know. Ryan Kilawan asks, what's the most hilarious battle in history? I'm not going to remember the name of it, but there's a Eastern European battle that was fought on an ice lake, and the story goes that that basically everybody who was trying to get in a formation were bouncing off of each other, that they couldn't form a formation, and ended up just sliding around on the ice like a bunch of ice skaters for like an entire day. This was a battle in like the 11th century, if I remember correctly. It's just like these guys were trying to fight each other, but ended up ice skating. Same thing actually kind of happened during the Russian Revolution, during the Russian Civil War, I should say. The Kernstadt. It's an island in St. Petersburg. Well, it's called Petrograd at that point. Bay. The Kernstadt rebellion happened, and they had to charge across the ice because the bay was frozen that night. And so they charged across the ice and ended up literally coming running in like they were surfing with guns, just like best freaking charge ever. Because the reports go that that some of them ended up sliding into the gunfire for about 150 feet a piece. Could you imagine that? Like you're charging and suddenly it's like you start getting shot at and people want to like stop, so they're like stop and they can't because they're just um funny American war though. Funny American battle. Um I'm forgetting the Virginia versus the Merrimack or something like that. It was a naval battle during the Civil War that um that these two ships just sat there broadsiding each other for like an hour and did nothing. the the gun technology had not progressed enough for these two ships to hurt each other. So all they did was dent each other's armors for like an hour or two, just shooting at each other for a couple hours. And I mean, like right next to each other, you can find a bunch of paintings of this, and like, yeah, just bouncing off of each other, like, oops, and then just eventually they just were like, I guess we'll go our merry ways. Like, what? um, but yeah. Oh, and by the way, thank you, Ryan Ramkalawan. Sorry, I'm definitely screwing up your name. Um, Virginia versus Monitor. Thank you, Brudnick. Um, the yeah, it was totally an anticlimax. That's what makes it funny. there's a there's a bunch of stuff like that. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the admiral who took over a British ship during the Revolution because it had sailed too far up a river. So he figured out how to make a wooden raft out of like just twigs and floated on board and took over. Like no shots were fired. He just showed up and said it's mine, and everybody agreed. Uh, QJR asks, "Do I have any thoughts on the Korean War?" It happened. Now, in terms of what's happening now, um, I have a lot of people because I did a video a while back about like what's the longest war in American history, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, what about the Korean War? You didn't even talk about that." And it's like because it only lasted for 3.5 years, and the whole joke is like, yeah, technically the no it was only an armistice. The war never, no peace treaty was signed. Yada yada yada. Um, but then there'd be a bunch of other wars that have been continuing for a lot longer that technically would still be in, like the Dutch and English. This is not American, obviously, but like the Dutch and English had a war in I'm forgetting the dates. It's like 1670s, something like that. And they didn't. This was basically a war on paper. Like England declared war because they were allied with like the Spanish or something like that, and nothing came of it. There was no actual fighting, and peace came between England and whatever the other country was. But England never signed it, and so like Britain, all the way until like 2002, technically was in a state of war with like the Netherlands. And like they didn't sign a treaty until then. Like just a symbolic thing of like, yeah, this, I guess this was a thing, kind of whatever. um so yeah, the Korean War I don't think is continuing as a lot of people would like to say, but it's interesting what's happening. Although I think we kind of screwed it up with this whole, like we denied the whole Iran deal, and now Korea's like, what are you doing? um, so RES, if you were a pirate, what would your pirate name be? uh, uh, Cipher still? I don't know. Then I could officially take my pseudonym as a real name. Let's see here. Brudnick asks, Harry Truman, good president or most incompetent? Was it moral for him to drop the atomic bombs on Japan? I'm not going to say it was moral, but I'm also not going to say it was immoral. Can we say amoral? It's war. I remember hosting a debate between students, and I'm just going to quote the student because it was just too perfect. They were debating over whether or not it was right to drop the bomb, and one of them simply said, "We're not throwing flowers at each other." At the same time, it's a really big difference between dropping a mother of all bombs, as we just recently did in Afghanistan, versus dropping an atomic bomb, which is way worse. The mother of all bombs is a conventional bomb. But you also have to consider the times in that. In terms of Truman overall, I think it was grossly incompetent when it came to handling Korea. He fired freaking George F. Kennan over, like, George F. Kennan was like, don't invade Korea. Stop. Well, okay, he wasn't saying don't invade Korea. He didn't really have a choice in that. He was saying, stop MacArthur. Don't pass the line. You'll get the Chinese involved. Guess what happened? And he fired George F. Kennan over that. Like, one of the greatest statesmen the U.S. has ever produced. Yeah, I don't like how he handled Korea. That was a debacle. By the end of it, it was just this silly shooting across the DMZ, and that's just dumb. But I can't fault him for how he handled World War II. So let's see here. I've seen you Ferb the Get guy asking about Castle Itter, and if I remember correctly, isn't that like the one where like freaking like Germans and Americans ended up fighting together, or something like that? I don't really remember much of it. But if it's the one that I'm thinking of, where there's a bunch of Americans and Germans working together to defeat like a here, I'll just look it up real quick. Let's see here. Number of Wehrmacht. Yep, yeah, that's the one. Who were fighting SS, and like that would make an excellent movie. Like, of all these World War II movies, like they keep on making freaking, here's the story of D-Day for the 111th time. It's like Billy the Kid. We don't need another Billy the Kid movie. Like, tired of talking about the guy. But you just have to, because it just keeps on coming up. But like, if you're going to do it, tell some good stories. Like, and that's exactly that's one for the books. Bunch of Americans go and try to liberate some prisoners, and then end up getting stuck against like an SS battalion or something like that, and then have to team up with the local Wehrmacht to fight off the SS. Like, what? That's awesome. How is this not a movie? How is Billy the War Fox? What do you mean by Billy the Kid being a leftist? What? he he was a Democrat. Just saying. he was definitely fighting on the Democratic side. He was fighting against Republicans. Something you have to understand about New Mexico history is that it's very politically divided towards the post-war thing. This is actually my subject that will probably be my dissertation. But a lot of the violence in New Mexico was oriented around party lines. You had the whole Santa Fe ring coming to power, and folks like oh no, I lost my moderator. Thanks, man, for helping out. Oh, geez, it's been 3 hours? Oh boy, I didn't realize it's been going this long. So in about 15 minutes, I'm going to call it quits, guys. So, but back to Billy the Kid. There's a lot of myth around him. I mean, like, you can't talk about the Lincoln County War without talking about him, even though he was, just a minor figure. So, yeah, I guess you could call him a rightist, because the Democratic Party was on the right at that point. Oh, apparently Westworld is starting in 15 minutes, so it's perfect timing. I love that show, by the way. Not quite like the original, but like they're doing really interesting stuff with it. Let's see here. Let's have emoji from. Let's go with the Pig King X666. Really piling it on there, dude. What is your opinion on the Vietnam War? And this is probably just going to be the last question because I can go on forever. And well, first of all, John, Texas history. I've gone as far as New Mexico, and I'm kind of avoiding Texas because that is a mess. But Vietnam, which is totally not a mess, right? Right, yeah, right. But the Vietnam War is not something that should be seen as purely American aggression, nor should it be seen as something that America lost. It's not like that. It's a lot more complicated. You don't just enter a war in 1964 and exit in 1973 and then lose it in 1975. There's 2 years there, but we did lose the political objective because of what happened in 1975, what happened after the war. Does that mean that we lost the war? I'd say no, but a lot of other people would say yes. It's more of an argument, though. Now, did we join for explicit reasons? And no. Like, people want to talk about, like, what's the political motivation? Did we fulfill our goals? If we didn't fulfill our goals, then we didn't win the war. But the war never had explicit goals. And it wasn't something that just began in 1964. Kennedy sent in the Green Berets in 1962. The MAG, Military Advisor Group. There's another A in there. Military Assistance and Advisor Group, I think is what it stands for, was sent in 1958, but that was actually just a reorganization of something that was there in 1950, and the first American to die in Vietnam was in 1947. I should say during the Vietnam War. First American to die in Vietnam was probably during the intervention in 18 like 70 something. Um, so yeah, I wouldn't call it a loss. I also wouldn't call it something with explicit goals. Um, it's way too wide to just say like, we were trying to defeat communism, or we were trying to prop up the South Vietnamese government. It's a lot more complicated than that. Um, Brednick had been the one who asked the Truman question before, and he says that it's Truman's fault. I mean, he could say that. um, but yeah, so I guess we have enough time for one more question. Um, let's see here. Well, that's an easy question. Netsujians at whatever. Sorry, as to how reliable is Snopes in general? Check their sources; they tend to be pretty good. Let's see here. Let's just go with a personal question from Ferb the Two Gad Get Guy. Um, how was your time in the army? Um, and wait, Lion 24, Castle Litter is being made into a movie? Really? I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds awesome. But how was my time in the army? So let's see here. Oh, and the next time I'll be live, um, I could possibly make this a regular thing. I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be traveling for about a month in late June. Um, but maybe after that, I could. This has been fun. I really like this. So maybe we could make this a regular thing. Um, so back to for the to how was my time in the army? Um, I hated it. I hated the army. um, the army. I joined the army not out of political things or anything like that. I mean, there was certainly that. While I was in there, getting ready and that, suddenly I became like ultra patriotic and blah blah blah. Um, you know, but and I was really hardcore conservative for a little bit in there. Um, but I actually joined up when I was an avowed anarchist. Um, and as has been pointed out before, is how the hell does an anarchist join the army? And to pay for college, man. Like, um, I I joined for the GI Bill. Um, the my parents didn't have the money to put me through college, and I didn't exactly have good enough grades to get any kind of scholarship. So we were at a freaking college fair, and my dad just kind of nudged me towards a recruiter one day, and I was like, okay. um, I shouldn't say like that he pushed me into it. It's obviously of my own volition. Um, but I did not uh, join for really any other reason. And that kind of changes also the way you serve, because if you join because simply you want the money, um, suddenly uh, a lot of things seem extra stupid to you, and tend to overthink things a lot. And that's like the worst thing you can do as a soldier, is overthink things. Um, and I was not a very good soldier. Um, but I did my duty. Um, don't think anybody can argue that. It's never Article 15. Um, but I certainly was a screw up.
So when I was in the army, I was a 19 kilo first and 19 delta second, which means tanker, then scout. They switched us to being scouts because, well, not gonna be driving tanks in Afghanistan. Although we did have some tanks. We actually had some tanks in our on our fob, but they were Russian tanks. But we had one that was working. We actually had a Russian T-62. That thing was awesome. Actually, I'd have to look back at the pictures. I don't remember if it was a T-62. We had a bunch of different things. I mean, we had like T-54s, T-50 threes, even no T-55s. That's the one with the brake. And we had a T-62 that worked, and we'd take it out to the range. The thing was awesome. But because we were all ex-tankers, so like we all wanted to get on our tanks again. You know, scouts are still cavalry, but you do a lot of dismounting, which in the cavalry there's this whole thing of death before dismount, and yeah, it's like becoming a scout is like a betrayal of everything. You know, it's that whole inner branch rivalry. Is you know, one platoon is in rivalry between the other, one company is in rivalry with another, one battalion is in rivalry with another, and then like one MOS is in rivalry with its closest one, and then the next closest, and so on and so forth until you have this like whole hierarchy of rivalries. And did I climb inside the T-62? I not only climbed inside of it, I shot it. we had leftover ammunition from the Russians, just sitting on a mountain. we straight up had leftover ammunition from the Russians. But yeah, it was awesome. But yeah, even in Afghanistan, while that's like, you know, going on tour is like the pinnacle of your service. Like I only went on one tour. It was a year-long tour to Afghanistan. But the like I have my journal. I wrote a journal from that, and it's just full of anger and it's not even anger at the enemy. Like I was so happy when we actually got in firefights. Like that was like I finally get to release my anger. I was never really angry at the enemy. It was more like I was just angry at other people. And like wow, I just implied the enemy weren't people. I'm sorry. But that's kind of the attitude, right? Yeah. I also have a sociologist / anthropologist for a mother, so like we have a there's that whole cultural relativism thing that like I definitely I can see it in my journal that I was definitely believing in that. But yeah, I don't remember which general said this, but he's one. I think it was the Master Sergeant of the Army, who actually was from my unit. He said, and I'm hoping he's the one who said it. War is nothing but sheer boredom stipulated by moments of sheer terror, and I think that's a pretty apt thing. I spent most of my time, you know, watching movies and watching the landscape for bad guys and freaking running around the fob when I was on the fob. You know, like you don't like it's actually fun like when something actually happens. You're excited and like finally but that got over with, and then I had another like year in the army, and most of that was just treading water, man. I was done. I was purely like you know, just doing what I the bare minimum to make it by. Like I was not interested anymore. And funny thing is, I never failed a PT test, so they had me take a PT test on the last freaking day. Still passed it, but still. Ugh. That's a hell of a way to get out of the army. Also, our unit has a tradition that they cut off your boots and throw them on the roof. So I had to ride home on a motorcycle with boots that didn't have shoelaces. So that was my service in the army, and I think that's a good place to stop it. I'm glad you guys were had fun. I had a lot of fun too. So I'm thinking I will make this a regular thing when I get back from all my travels this summer. And I will see you all again.